Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the second lecture in Australia and the world. I trust you now feel confident about where the unit's going. You've got your readers, you've got your textbooks, you're in your tutorials, you've met your fellow students, you've met your tutors, so you're now all very happy. At least I hope you are, and feel secure about where you're going. Today, the second lecture, the topic is transits of Venus and oceans. So we're looking both at European vessels crossing oceans, and we're looking at the transit of Venus, which is the topic of our lecture, our tutorial next week. So today there's going to be a little introduction, which is the first part of the lecture. This is historiographical. I'm going to look at how we write about, how we conceive Europeans coming to the Pacific. The second part is going to look at the Portuguese in Asia. The third part is going to look at the VOC, that's the Verenigde Oostindische Compagnie, the United East Indies Company, which in English we generally call the Dutch East Indies Company. But the abbreviation of it is its Dutch initials, VOC, if you prefer. So the VOC in Australia, and then we're going to look at Cook and the Enlightenment. So they're the four parts of the lecture. So the first part is, does discovery matter? Does it really matter what European visitors came to these shores and elsewhere in the Pacific many hundred years ago? Does it have any significance? Why should we even look at it, especially if there were no consequences to their voyages? Now, the great Australian historian Manning Clark did write about exploration, and he began his monumental six-volume history of Australia with a discussion of European exploration, and he also, his shorter history of Australia also has an introductory chapter on exploration. Well, here's Manning Clark, painted by Arthur Boyd with his black dog down on the Shoalhaven. That's what Manning Clark looked like in the 80s, towards the end of his life. And there he is at his desk at the Australian National University in the 1960s. In the years before desks had computers, and there were big black dial phones. Isn't that a little exercise in nostalgia? Or not nostalgia for you, nostalgia for me maybe, how officers once were. Well, Manning Clark, who was born in 1915 and died in 1991, took this approach to exploration. He saw the European exploration of the Pacific as anticipating the three great divisions in future Australian society. And when he looked at Australian society, he identified three great strands in Australian society, which were the divisions in that society in the 20th century in his life. First of all, he saw a very strong Catholic strand in Australia, primarily Irish. Today, with a more multicultural overlay, particularly an Italian overlay, but certainly until the 1960s, predominantly an Irish Catholicism. And in his history of Australia, he looked at the voyage of Pedro Fernandes de Quiros from Peru to what he thought was Australia, but was in fact Vanuatu, which he called Austriala del Espiritu Santo, the great southern land of the Holy Spirit. The great southern land of the Holy Spirit. He saw that voyage as anticipating this strong Catholic element in Australian history. A Catholic element which is still there. You know, it gets trotted out at these Labor Party conferences. We've just had one in the last week. And that strong Irish Catholic element in Australian history, until very recently associated primarily with the Australian Labor Party and the Irish community. Although that's changing. We've now got Catholics in the Liberal Party, which we never had before. Malcolm Turnbull is a Catholic, and of course Tony Abbott is famously Catholic and trained for the priest and celibacy and failed badly at both, but has become a pretty effective politician. The second stream, which Manning Clark identified as being important in Australia, was Protestant materialism. He took this argument from the German sociologist Max Weber, who said that Protestantism went with capitalism. that Protestantism, with its emphasis on individual, the individual responsibility, an individual conscience, the individual finding God, the individual having a direct relationship with God, was reflected in the material world in a belief in the individual responsibility for one's own prosperity. So in this German sociologist Max Weber's conception, Protestantism encouraged capitalism. Protestants made ambitious, self-made men. So the Dutch were disappointed with Australia because there was no money to be made there. They weren't looking for a land to dedicate to the Holy Spirit. They were looking for a land where they could make money trading, and they were disappointed. And of course, Protestant materialism is reflected in the Protestant ascendancy, generally associated with the Liberal Party, despite the presence of Malcolm Turnbull and Tony Abbott in high positions in that today. And the third strand in the future Australian society that Clarke anticipated was the Enlightenment, the 18th century set of ideas that revolve around rationalism and science. And so the voyage of Cook and Banks in the Endeavour in 1769 and 1770, whose main motivation was scientific exploration, is a useful symbol of this Enlightenment strand, the scientific rationalist strand, if you like, agnostic or even atheistic strand in Australian society. So Clarke identified a diversity of motives in Europeans coming to the Pacific, religious, commercial and scientific, and sees this diversity of motives as being reflected in the future Australian society, where the things that move people, the things that drive people's public and private behaviour, reflect a similar diversity of motives. Religious, commercial, so the desire to have things okay with your soul, the desire to have a good material life and make money, and the quest for knowledge and a rational explanation of the world. These are the strong motives that guide people. So that is how Clarke tied in the significance of exploration to subsequent Australian history. And he sees these strands of Catholic Christianity, Protestant materialism and the Enlightenment in successive European ventures, specifically in these three, which I've identified in the summary here: the Portuguese, who were Catholic, the Dutch East Indies Company, and then Cook and the Enlightenment. So here we go. First of all, the Portuguese. Now, Portuguese maritime exploration began at much the same time as Ming China abandoned seafaring. Remember I talked about Zheng He. Remember the eunuch last week? I'm sure none of you can forget that. And so around the 1430s, Portuguese ships, they were called caravels, started sailing southwards along the coast of Africa, looking for what they could find. What they were looking for were Christians and gold. Now, of course, if Ming China had not abandoned seafaring, it would have been Chinese junks, not drunks. There's plenty of Chinese drunks in this town, particularly at the casino on Friday and Saturday night. But anyway, Chinese junks would have been arriving in Europe rather than Portuguese caravels arriving in India, as was the case in 1497. The pioneering voyage of Vasco da Gama, whose years are there, was in 1497, and this